A genuine attempt to bridge the chasm. That's how the UK's Prime Minister describes his Brexit proposals to the EU. They are not convinced, but remain open to suggestions. So are Mr Johnson's ideas workable? And is the EU ready to compromise? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. Today with me, Peter Dobbie. Die in a ditch and not extend Brexit. His words, or deliver on October the 31st. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson may have to live up to those words very soon. That's if the European Union does not approve his proposals. The EU has already said there are problems. Key is what happens to the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. There are more talks planned for October the 17th, but that's just 10 days before Boris Johnson says leave will mean leave, even if it's against the law, as the law now stands. With one eye on a possible general election, MPs would have to vote for what he wants, knowing that the EU can ultimately veto the whole thing anyway.
Do not for one moment resile from the fact that we have shown great flexibility in the interests of reaching an accommodation with our European friends and achieving the resolution for which we all yearn. If our European neighbours choose not to show a corresponding willingness to reach a deal, then we shall have to leave on October the 31st without an agreement. And we are ready to do so. But that outcome would be a failure of statecraft for which all parties would be held responsible.
OK, we'll get the reaction from the EU and Ireland shortly, but first, here's why this issue has become so very contentious. No border checks exist at the moment between Ireland and the UK, and Ireland is adamant that's the way it'll stay. The EU's economy depends on all of its members being able to trade as if it is one country. That would be to jeopardise it if Ireland is openly trading with an outside country, which the UK will become post-Brexit. Boris Johnson's so-called final offer does suggest a compromise. Northern Ireland gets to stay in the EU's single market, but will have to leave the customs union along with Britain. If that doesn't work, the proposal would allow Northern Ireland to vote every 4 years on whether it wants to abide by EU trade rules. So, how's that gone down with the parties involved? European Council President Donald Tusk says he's, quote, open but unconvinced to the proposal, a scepticism shared by the wider EU.
As we have said, problematic points in the United Kingdom's proposal, and further work is needed, but that work needs to be done by the United Kingdom and not the other way round. We would remind you that it's the UK leaving the European Union and not the European Union leaving the UK, and we are doing everything in our power to ensure that that exit is on an orderly basis, and we are willing to engage constructively with our counterparts, but we are not going to be the ones left holding the bag, the ball, or any other kind of object.
Meanwhile, the Irish Prime Minister, Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, made it clear the current proposals would not work.
Our objective is very clear. We don't want to see any customs posts between North and South, nor do we want to see any tariffs or restrictions on trade North and South. They were all abolished in the 1990s. We don't want to go back to that. The majority of people in the North don't. The majority of people in the Republic of Ireland don't.
Well, the proposals are also struggling to find support in Northern Ireland, but members of the Democratic Unionist Party have defended Boris Johnson, blaming Ireland for setting the UK on a path to no deal.
The proposal won't be amended. The proposal is there. The proposal will get the support of the House of Commons. Therefore, the European Union needs to look very seriously at this proposal. It's a very reasonable proposal. And as I say, I hope that other European leaders will prevail upon the Irish Government to look at this proposal in a sensible and serious way. To date, they haven't done that.
OK, let's get going. Joining us today on Inside Story from Dublin on Skype is Donnacha ó Beacháin, a professor of politics at the School of Law and Government at Dublin City University. In Brussels, we have Pieter Cleppe, head of the think tank Open Europe Brussels. And in Birmingham, we'll be joined by Alex de Ritter, the director of the Centre for Brexit Studies at Birmingham City University. Welcome to you all. Donnacha in Dublin first. So the EU is open but not convinced. What has to change to convince the European Union?
Well, essentially, this proposal has been ruled out as a basis for a final agreement. What is lacking is detail. It's again aspirational. It speaks of, again, a frictionless border, which is what we've had for the last quarter century now in Ireland, and maintaining that despite the wish of the United Kingdom to leave the customs union and single market. But it lacks the detail on how that can be reconciled. And more worrying, perhaps, is that it has this mechanism whereby, in trying to create the illusion of the consent of Northern Ireland by saying that if Northern Ireland doesn't want to be on the same arrangements as the rest of the United Kingdom, it can opt out. But the thing is that Northern Ireland doesn't have a sovereign government. It has a regional assembly which hasn't met now for almost 3 years, and it's an exercise in conflict resolution, indeed conflict management. And it would give a veto essentially to one party in Northern Ireland, the DUP, which has a close relationship with the Conservative Party and does not represent majority opinion in Northern Ireland. It's important to stress that Northern Ireland voted to remain in the European Union. The vast majority of people in Ireland, north and south, are in favour of the backstop, which Boris Johnson's proposals are essentially trying to dismantle, but in a way, as I said, that doesn't honour existing commitments that the British government have entered into.
Just to be clear, Pieter Cleppe in Brussels, when we talk about the backstop, I'm never quite sure what that actually means. What that actually means is the continued free movement of stuff across a borderless border. But staying with you, Pieter, in Brussels, when the Irish Prime Minister, or Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, talks about a number of aspects that still need to be fine-tuned, which aspects is he talking about?
Well, yesterday, Prime Minister Taoiseach Varadkar, mentioned a number of options as a possible outcome, and he made clear that the Irish government is not prepared to tolerate that Northern Ireland would leave the same customs regime as the EU, and I find this quite problematic because I think if you look at British politics, even the Labour Party is opposed to customs checks within the territory of the United Kingdom. So I think as long as the Irish government sticks to its position that Northern Ireland has to remain in the same customs union as the EU, I think that's going to be very problematic. What the British government wants to do is to have Northern Ireland in the same customs union as the United Kingdom, so you wouldn't have customs checks between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, but then of course you would need customs checks between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. Now the proposal of the UK government is that these customs checks would only be done at company premises, really. Now that can work, but it can only work if you exempt small businesses. And the European Union is not prepared to do that, even if its external customs barrier is actually quite leaky. And in practice, we have a lot of flexibility there. But the same flexibility, it is not prepared for the sake of peace in Northern Ireland. So I think both the Irish government and the EU will have to make a move now if they want to deal, given that also the UK government has moved quite considerably.
OK, we'll come on to those 2 points that you're raising, Pieter, a little later. Let's go to Alex de Ritter in Birmingham. Alex, when it comes to the slightly absurd element of this, because critics of Boris Johnson say what he's proposing with two borders is slightly absurd. I've made a wee list on my phone. Bear with me. The number of organisations, by my reckoning, that are for what Mr Johnson is proposing or not. The DUP, yes, green tick, but we have to build in a health warning as raised by Donnacha. Sinn Féin, no. SDLP, no. The Alliance Party, no. The Green Party, no. Manufacturing Northern Ireland, no. Retail Northern Ireland, no. Northern Ireland Retail Consortium, no. CBI Northern Ireland, no. Nobody in Northern Ireland seems to think this will actually work. So what's the rabbit out the hat here that Boris Johnson can come up with between now, the next set of talks, October the 17th, and Halloween, October the 31st?
Well, I don't think there is one. I think realistically the only options he really has on the table if he wants to reach a withdrawal agreement with the European Union is to either go back to Theresa May's final negotiated deal and somehow repackage that to be more palatable to his MPs, or otherwise revert back to the EU's original offer, which effectively put the border down the Irish Sea. I just do not see anything else in the offing here. You know, when we talk about technological solutions and we talk about tracking vehicles and the like, that's all very well when you're operating within the same customs union zone. But once you cross a customs barrier, you then need to have checkpoints in place. And even Norway, where people talk about Norway being a member of the single market, which is kind of what Johnson proposes for Northern Ireland, but Norway is not in the customs union with the EU, that the wait times there on the best of days can still be in the order of 15 minutes. And of course, the Norway-Sweden border is quite a small one relative to Norway in some sense, in terms of the size of those economies. The Northern Ireland border, of course, 300 miles long, quite straddly. It would just be a recipe for smuggling and contraband. So really the only thing on the table for him to pursue a withdrawal agreement would be to go back to one of those two versions of the agreement that was thrashed out over the last year or so. Failing that, it's hard to see then where he goes if he really wants to leave the European Union by the 31st of October.
And Donnacha Beacháin there in Dublin. I mean, I guess to boil this down, Mrs May's deal, MPs hated it. The European Union was kind of on board. But what Mr Johnson is proposing is an inverse of that. So the European Union will hate it. But chances are, looking at the numbers, he might get the parliamentary numbers in the House of Commons in London to get it to fly.
Well, I doubt he'll get the numbers in Westminster. I think that is a mountain that he can't climb, and that's why he's eagerly looking for an election before this is sorted out. But it's correct to say, as your previous speaker highlighted, that the border in Ireland is extremely difficult to patrol, and it's impossible really to imagine any workable alternative arrangement to the backstop that might retain the status quo while allowing the United Kingdom to leave the customs union and single market. And that's been at the heart of the problem. I mean, there are over 300 crossings between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. You compare that to the eastern flank of the European Union. If you go from the Baltic Sea, for example, to the Black Sea, there are 137 crossings. And there's no mechanism in the world whereby, at least there's in existence now, where you have two separate custom regimes and yet you don't have a border to police that. But to get bogged down on the issue of trade and transport is to miss the whole point. Northern Ireland has been a arena of conflict for decades. And indeed, Ireland has been an arena of conflict for centuries. And it's not about trade. Trade wasn't at the heart of the conflict. The conflict was essentially about identity. And what Brexit has done, against the wishes of the people of Ireland, North and South, is to reframe the constitutional question and to take Northern Ireland out of the same arrangements as the Republic of Ireland against the will of the people of Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. This is essentially an expression of English nationalism. It's nothing to do, they never thought for a moment about the implications for the situation in Ireland when the vote took place in 2016. And we are running out of time. But why are we running out of time? It's 3.5 years since the Brexit referendum took place, but no clear workable plan has been outlined by the British government. And now with 10 days to a European Council meeting, we're getting a draft, a couple of pages draft with no detail, as if it's the basis for some new agreement, as if everything that happened in the last 2 or 3 years didn't happen, that we weren't negotiating with the British government because it was Theresa May's government, who, as you remember, is a member of the same party as Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson was Foreign Secretary in December 2017 when the backstop was initially negotiated, and the backstop then was a compromise. What he's trying to do is not, offer a compromise. The compromise is already there. It's a matter of whether essentially the British government honours its existing agreements and what it has signed up to, or it reneges on them.
Alex de Ritter in Birmingham, would you agree with that analysis, in as much as the Good Friday Agreement, I mean, Donnacha's got it right, surely. The Good Friday Agreement was never about trade. It was about, in effect, respect. It's the people who live in Ireland respecting the autonomy and the wishes of the people who live in Northern Ireland and vice versa. But Project Fear quotes kind of says, Boris Johnson is endangering the Good Friday Agreement. But you can only endanger the Good Friday Agreement if those political paymasters who had alliances and allegiances with the paramilitaries actually say to those self-same people, take up arms again, go back to the troubles of the 70s and the 80s. But in reality, that is never, ever going to happen, surely.
But I really couldn't comment in that regard. You can never be sure as to what impact the return to a hard border would have. But, you know, the moment you start contemplating any kind of installations, whether you talk about customs posts or whether you talk about policing a border with drones, as some technological fantasists have been prone to doing, you provide a target for disaffected people in society. And I think one of the key points here is, of course, that the EU takes its obligations as an upholder of the Good Friday Agreement very seriously. And that in turn gets to the wider significance of the EU, which I think is lost on the British public, particularly because many people here who object to the EU just see it as a vehicle for taking British money. And when it's pointed out to them that the EU money is returned to Britain, well, they say it's our money, we can spend it how we want, that's what we should do. But that misses the wider point. The wider point being, of course, that the European Union was a vehicle to promote peace on a shattered and largely destroyed continent in the ashes of World War II, and in a sense that the Northern Ireland peace process has mirrored that in a fashion. I had a colleague from Belfast who once said to me, in Northern Ireland, nobody is Northern Irish. You're either Irish or you're British. And the thing that the European identity element has done is to try and diffuse that in a fashion. There's something that both communities could grab onto as an additional element. And for Remainers in particular, that European identity, as they would put it, is being torn away from them. And in the case of Northern Ireland, it has particular implications for how the province would go forward.
Pieter Cleppe in Brussels. Let's broaden this out for a second. Boris Johnson is hostile to the idea of a customs union. It's difficult when you've got countries, say, like the relationship that Alex has already mentioned, like Norway and Sweden, where it's half in, half out. But logic would dictate that Boris Johnson isn't hostile to the customs union. So his hostility is a function of his political imperative, i.e. he wants to be a Conservative Prime Minister again after the next election. How's that dynamic going down in Brussels for you, given that his ambition is vaulting? He's only ever wanted to be, quotes, king of the world. Now he is, in his mind, I guess, if he was a 4-year-old again, king of the world, and that's where he wants to stay.
What are people in Brussels thinking about this? Well, diplomats are, of course, trying to work something out, and member states are, to a large degree, I would say, on the position of the Irish government. However, there are reports from Bloomberg that France and Germany would have been looking into the possibility to have a time limit to the backstop. That would also be apparently Plan B of Boris Johnson in case the EU would ultimately reject his compromise proposal. Now, I think ultimately the keys are with the Irish government, and at the moment their position is, look, the UK can leave the EU, that's possible. It can leave in an orderly manner with a deal, but the condition is that a part of the UK, Northern Ireland, stays under the customs regime of the EU, which effectively would mean if the UK will have an independent trade policy, and of course as the world's 5th biggest economy, one day that will happen, that you would need customs checks inside UK territory. And I think people have to understand that's not such an unreasonable, it's not so unreasonable for the British, not just the Conservative Party, but actually also Labour, to be against that. So I think the Irish government has to think very deeply if it is actually, with its hardline position, not creating a no-deal dynamic, because ultimately, if there is a no deal, and I don't think a no deal will happen at the end of this month, I think we'll have an extension instead, just my 5 cents. But if there is a no deal at one point, that could happen after Boris Johnson is, for example, re-elected and has been radicalized because he has to make all kinds of promises to convince Brexit party voters. In such a context, Ireland will be the great loser, because not so much the UK, but its partners in the EU, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, Germany, would ask the Irish government to protect the border in Northern Ireland. So
okay.
This...
let me just boil that down, Peter, and put that point to Donnacha in Dublin. Donnacha, Simon Coveney, the Irish Foreign Minister, being very, very tough this past week. But the Dublin government, the Taoiseach, Varadkar, behind the scenes, they seem to be signalling, actually, we might be able to talk. On top of which, Emmanuel Macron, radio silence. Angela Merkel, radio silence. Is there a warming of the mood music to what Mr Johnson is putting out there?
Not at all, in my view. What they're trying to do is simply not close the door on talks. They've made it clear that these proposals, such as they are, cannot form the basis of a durable agreement simply because they lack any cogent detail. But at the same time, they're political enough to know that they can't rule it out of hand, especially when it seems that Boris Johnson is trying to engineer a situation whereby the blame will be put on the European Union and the Irish government. Just in relation to what your previous speaker said about it all coming down to the Irish government, I think that flatters the position of the Irish government somewhat. Ireland is part of the European Union. The European Union negotiates on these issues, not the Irish government. The Irish government, as a constituent part of the European Union, has its views, and indeed the only frontier, land frontier between the United Kingdom and Ireland will be on the island of Ireland. So, of course, Ireland is central to this. But don't for a moment think that this is not the EU position. This has been an attempt, indeed, by the Conservative government for some time to kind of divide and rule, as it were, to get the suggestion that Ireland is an outlier, that actually the European Union is really eager to concede to Boris Johnson's demands, but it's the Irish somehow that are the stumbling block. They are at the one page on this. Indeed, the EU Parliament Steering Committee yesterday said that what Boris Johnson was talking about was not even remotely in the realm of what was feasible. This is not something that is uniquely Irish. And I have to say, from the long-term perspective in Ireland, this kind of is eerily redolent of how the border came to exist in the first place in 1920. We're now approaching the anniversary of the partition of Ireland. How was it done? It was essentially a private deal between the Tory party, the Tory-led government, and the Unionists in Northern Ireland, and essentially it was done through the Government of Ireland Act, which said in its document that its aim was to achieve united Ireland, but the very same document partitioned Ireland.
OK, Alex de Ritter in Birmingham, what do you make of Boris Johnson's kind of calling card at the moment, which is let's get Brexit done? That was the calling card at the Conservative Party conference last week. Some people might say, look, he's being really, really cynical, because the selling point here seems to me to be, let's get it over the line, let's do it. This is stage one. And some people are saying stage two might take a decade.
Yes, I would think, to put it pithily, that remark is about as instrumental as being in the kitchen and saying, let's chop an onion. You know, what happens at the end? Well, the simple answer to that fact is the withdrawal agreement is not even the beginning of the end. To quote his hero Churchill, it's just the end of the beginning. If we get a withdrawal agreement in place, in the improbable possibility of that happening, you know, in the next few weeks, that would just be part one. And you know, let's be clear about this. People who say they are sick of Brexit, who think that Brexit should come to an end, get Brexit done, simply getting withdrawal agreement in place will not get Brexit done. If we want a new comprehensive economic relationship with the rest of the European Union, if you look at a relatively simple case such as the Canada-EU Free Trade Agreement, the CETA, that took a good 8 years of negotiation. Now, it's an entirely different ballgame when you have a member country that wants to leave and wants to have a level of economic integration that just goes beyond simple free trade. This process could easily take a decade. So if people are sick of Brexit now, they haven't seen nothing yet. And even if the UK were to fall out of the European Union with no withdrawal agreement in place, it would then have to begin the process of patching up all those bilateral arrangements that would cover key sectors such as chemicals, aviation, medicine, food standards and so on.
Can I ask you all, just to wrap up, in 10-second answers, please? Peter, coming to you first, in 10 seconds, do you think Brexit stage one will happen on October the 31st?
I don't think so. The EU does not seem to be willing to engage with the compromise, so I think Boris will resign, just a gamble, and we'll have an election, and there will be an extension requested by technical government until maybe the 1st of April.
OK, Donnacha O'Broichen in Dublin, do you think Brexit stage one will happen on Halloween?
No, I don't think so. I think that we're not anywhere near the point where that's possible.
Alex, how about you?
Well, there was a time when I thought no deal was distinctly possible at Halloween, but now I don't, for the simple reason that the Ben Act has all but ruled that out, and I don't think Prime Minister Johnson will be able to find a way around that. So now I think there'll be an extension.
and the Ben Act. That's a whole different conversation. Gentlemen, the clock, as ever, has beaten us here on Inside Story. Thank you so much for your company. Thanks to all our guests. They were Donnacha O'Broican, Pieter Cleppe and Professor Alex de Ritter. And thank you to you, too, for your company. You can see the show again anytime you want on the website, aljazeera.com/Inside Story. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com. And you can also talk to us on Twitter. Our handle, as ever, at AJ Inside Story, or you can tweet me. I'll tweet you back. I'm at Peter Dobbie1. From me, Peter Dobbie, and everyone on the team here in Doha. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye for now.